Hi, everybody. I just finished Citizenship Without Illusions by David Koyzis. This is from IVP, and I want to say thank you to IVP for sending me this review copy. This is my genuine, honest take on this pretty short little book. But real quick, I just want to say that I really liked David Koyzis' previous book with InterVarsity, which was Political Visions and Illusions, in which he gives kind of an overview of different political ideologies from a very thoughtful Christian perspective. And I would highly recommend that book if you're interested in political theory coming from a faith kind of Christian perspective. It's a very thoughtful, balanced, carefully reasoned presentation of different political ideas and historical ideas. So I was very intrigued by this one. This is a much shorter, I would say even more readable guide to political engagement from a Christian perspective. So anyways, I really appreciated his previous work that I was familiar with, and so I was really intrigued by this new one. That's how I'm kind of coming into this, but let me take you through my typical format, which is covering the main idea of the book, the research behind it, the readability of the style, and then my general reactions to it. So the main idea of Citizenship Without Illusions is this is not so much a deep breakdown or overview of different political ideas. There is some work on the difference between a conservative approach to politics versus a progressive approach, but this is more of just honestly, this is more of a book just about how to even think about citizenship in general, and then by extension, how do you think about political engagement once you've thought more carefully about the idea of being a citizen. So it's really a zoomed out, and this is something I like about this book a lot, which I'll say more about in a minute. It's really a zoomed out, kind of an elevated look at the whole topic. So he doesn't get into back and forth critiques of certain political ideas so much as he tries to stay at this higher level of thinking, which is to think carefully about even the concept of citizenship. What does it mean to be a citizen of a group of people in our current time? What is the history behind the idea of citizenship? How does that dovetail with kind of the rise of nationhood or nation states historically, which is kind of a specific phenomenon in human history. That's more of the tenor of the conversation. And then once that's kind of in place, how do you then kind of, having your lenses adjusted correctly, if you want to use that metaphor, how do you then think about, as a Christian with certain allegiances in faith, how does one practice political engagement or loyalty to whatever degree that means, or patriotism to whatever degree that means, to whatever citizenship group you happen to be a part of in the world, in the globe. That's kind of what he's getting at with Citizenship Without Illusions. So he steps through all of those ideas chapter by chapter, first situating it most broadly in the broad kind of concept of citizenship, and then it does get more practical by the end. So it's not just a highfalutin philosophical kind of abstract thing, but it does start on the more abstract level and then drills down to, there's a chapter on thinking about voting. There's discussions about paying taxes and how does violence play into citizenship or nation states and nationhood and all of that. He does get into practical matters once kind of rooting it in that high level conversation. So that's what Citizenship Without Illusions is about. I mean, the subtitle is pretty clear. It's a Christian guide to political engagement. And I want to read one quote just to kind of tie off the main idea. This will give you a sense of the tenor of the book and kind of how he's thinking about it and writing about it. But he says, this is David Koyzis, "We are members of multiple social formations at the same time. Each of these makes a legitimate claim on our loyalties, and we need to balance our respective obligations toward these communities. No single one of these can make a total claim on our lives." So that gives you a taste of the way that he's breaking down these concepts. The thoughtfulness, there's a balance, and there's definitely that high-level, zoomed-out kind of philosophical look. So let me get into the research behind it. I'm not going to say a ton about this. I mean, his area of expertise is political theory. So this is not, what I will say is that this is not a book that's rooted primarily in theological study or in biblical exegesis. It's much more rooted in history and political theory. So Hannah Arendt shows up, for example, but he relies on political theoreticians and historical accounts. He talks, Tom Holland's work on history shows up. That's more of where the research is grounded. Now, he does absolutely reference scripture. He does talk about the Bible. He does pull in some theological claims and theological arguments, but it's not primarily work on those things. So the research is much more heavily weighted in political theory and history, especially in the beginning of the book when he's talking about the history of citizenship. as an idea. Now, the readability of it, this is very short. It's just not even 150 pages, which for a book that's kind of at this level is very short. I found it super readable. I found it even more readable than his previous work, which I really liked, in Political Visions and Illusions. That one's a little bit more academic and a little bit more granular on some of the ideas he breaks down. This one is very clear. It's very poised in kind of his angle and his posture he's taking towards the whole topic, which means that it's very, it's not polemic at all. It's very reasoned and very, poised, very balanced, very stable, I guess is a way I would put it. And so for me, that makes it super readable, because I just found it was easy to engage on like an intellectual level. It's not super emotionally, pushes you one way or another. I really, really found it readable. I would definitely give this to anyone of varying levels of reading comfort or reading experience. I don't think that I think his previous one is going to be maybe step 2. If someone's not really read a lot, they could read this first and then go over and read that one. And finally, my reactions to this. You've probably gotten a good sense of my reaction already. Really, really liked this. I liked a few things about it that I've already hinted at. First of all, I loved the historical work he does near the beginning of the book. That's my favorite aspect of this book, is drilling into the historical concept of citizenship, because I feel like that is something in conversations about politics or political alignment, or in conversations in the church about all that stuff, I think we just blow past the very baseline idea of like, what are we even talking about when we talk about citizenship, or like group loyalty or allegiance to a nation? What are we even thinking about when we talk about those things, and where do those ideas come from? Because the idea of being loyal to a nation, as we think of the nation state today, is not a given historically. Certainly it wasn't in the air when scriptural texts were written that typically get bandied around. So I really love that he pauses the whole thing, digs into that first. And that's probably, I think in my estimation, that's like the strongest content in the book, are those early chapters, or at least they're my favorite. So I love all that part. I loved thinking about citizenship more carefully. I also really liked how poised and balanced it is. I've already talked about that. His chapter on progressivism and conservatism as ways of thinking is, I think you could read that and not really get a sense of where he lands personally on that. He's very clear and is able to support and critique both kind of ways of thinking about politics, and that's indicative of how he talks about the rest of the book. A third thing I really like is the kind of global focus on it. So it's really not, he's Canadian, and I believe he teaches or taught in Canada. So he brings in that perspective, but it's not just North American. He really talks globally. In a pretty short page count, he manages to zoom out and look around at different currents around the globe, and brings in kind of examples or almost case studies or metaphors from other parts of the world that are not just North American. So I really appreciated that. So there's a lot I really liked about this. It's shorter than I was expecting. I would have been okay with a longer book. Some people may wish it got more practical quicker. It stays in that more historical, philosophical register at the kind of near the beginning. But for me, it was a really good balance. I think this is an excellent supplement to his first book that I talked about. And I think it sits neatly in a space of writing, especially explicitly Christian writing, that is really about political theory, and not just political theology, but political theory. It sits in that space really nicely in a way that not many books do and not many writers do. So I think this plays a pretty unique kind of role in the landscape of publishing on this topic. And I really liked the thoughtfulness. I really liked the balance. I really liked the global focus. All those things that I mentioned. It's a very calm, very poised book on political theory from an explicitly Christian perspective that I think is going to provoke a lot of thought, a lot of careful thought, hopefully, and yeah, some practical action. So those are my thoughts on David Koyzis and IVP's Citizenship Without Illusions. If any of that is of interest to you, I'd definitely recommend grabbing this one. But as always, thank you for taking a few minutes to watch.